Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the ISO, I'd like to welcome you to the Inter-SC Trades and Regional Markets Working Group today. We're going to be discussing the straw proposal that was posted on August 2nd. My name is Christina Guimera, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I will be facilitating today's meeting. Today's slide deck presentation is available on the initiative webpage, and you can get to that page by going to kaiso.com. And then under the Stakeholder Center tab on the home page, you'll see Policy Initiatives. If you click that link, it will take you out to our main initiative landing page where you can search for the initiative webpage. Just a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and the video file will be posted to the initiative webpage for information and convenience purposes only. The recordings and any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. If you need any technical assistance at any point during the meeting, please send a chat to Inteller Events, the host. And to ask questions during the meeting, you can open the participant and chat panels on the bottom right, and you can then raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon at the bottom of your WebEx screen. Or if you joined audio only, please press *3 on your device. And for everyone joining us today, please state your name and affiliation first before speaking. And if you have any issues with raising your hand, you can also send comments and questions via chat to all panelists or to me directly. Right here is a visual representation of where we are in the stakeholder process. We're here in the proposal development stage right after the straw proposal was posted and right before the draft final proposal. Today's agenda will include a background overview on Inter-SC trades, followed by an example of Inter-SC trades of energy, then a validation of Inter-SC trades of energy before we wrap up with our next steps. So with that, I'll turn it over to Milos.
Thank you, Christina. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for taking the time on a Tuesday to work through another initiative, and hopefully this is a straightforward one and a brief effort on Inter-SC trades in regional markets. I'll start with a little bit of an overview of the proposal, some of the components of the proposal, and background on Inter-SC trades. Then, as Christina noted, we'll walk through an example for folks that are not familiar with Inter-SC trades, functionality, and how they work and how they settle. We'll walk through a simple example, and then we'll finish out with just a couple of other aspects of how Inter-SC trades work, particularly on the validation front, so that folks can get a full picture of how Inter-SC trades function, what's their purpose, and then we'll talk about next steps on this particular initiative. I'll start with just a little bit of an overview to give you a sense of what the proposal is and what we're covering, and then we're going to get into some of the meatier topics on Inter-SC trades. As a starting point, I do want to highlight the reason that we're picking up this effort is we think it's fairly narrow, but it's on Inter-SC trades in regional markets because this did come up through the EDAM initiative. We didn't necessarily see a value at that point in time from stakeholders, didn't speak too much about it, but we've seen subsequently some requests as we've been going through implementation activities. We've seen some requests where there may be potential value in Inter-SC trade functionality, and we've evaluated that at least as proposed. The lift to implement this functionality is not extensive, and it's something that could be included, if approved, within the broader implementation activity of the EDAM effort for May of 2026. And I'll cover some of those logistical aspects as we go through the initiative. But as a starting point, just to provide a little bit of an overview of what we're going to talk about today, Inter-SC trades, as it notes there, it's an optional market feature. It's not something that's required to be effectuated, but it's an optional settlement feature in the market that facilitates settlement of certain market revenues and settlements between scheduling coordinators. Inter-SC trades don't impact market optimization. They don't impact the production of schedules, nor market dispatch. They're strictly an optional market settlement feature. Inter-SC trades today are supported only within the ISO balancing area and are not a feature of the wider EIM footprint, nor are they a proposed currently feature of the wider EDAM or day-ahead market footprint. And that's why we're looking through this initiative, should that Inter-SC trade functionality be extended to the extent that parties find value in it, across the wider market footprint. And so the proposal, as we put forward in that straw proposal published earlier in the month, is to extend the inter-SC trade functionality for inter-SC trades of energy, extending that functionality to both EIM areas as well as future EDAM areas. If we can go to the next slide. And I'll get through a few of these slides and then we'll pause for questions before moving on to the example. But as a bit of background in terms of the role of inter-SC trades, for those of you that are not familiar with these, they're, as I mentioned, a settlement mechanism. They facilitate contractual settlement of bilateral power purchase arrangements between parties represented by scheduling coordinators. Some bilateral arrangements provide for certain disposition of market revenues compared to the bilaterally agreed upon price for the contract, and inter-SC trades can, those inter-scheduling coordinator trades can facilitate settlement of those market settlements between the contracting parties, to the extent, again, that parties find value in doing that through the market as opposed to doing it outside of the market bilaterally, having to settle the bilateral contractual payment obligations as well as the market settlements that may arise from either that resource or load participating in the market. And so inter-SC trades are that settlement mechanism that can be utilized. It's not required, and can support some of those bilateral arrangements that parties have through our settlement process. Depending on the type of inter-SC trade, as we'll talk on the next slide, these inter-SC trades and settlements could occur either in the day-ahead market or the real-time market. So they span both markets that the ISO manages. If we go on to the next slide, please. So continuing with the background, there are three types of inter-SC trades that are currently effectuated within the ISO balancing area. And as I noted earlier, the proposal is to extend that first one to the EIM and EDAM areas. But inter-SC trades of energy is one type of inter-SC trades, and that, again, can facilitate bilateral power purchase arrangements or contractual bilateral arrangements or trades of energy between parties that are represented by scheduling coordinators, either in the day-ahead or the real-time market. So this inter-SC trade can be effectuated either in day-ahead or the real-time market. And as we'll talk a bit later, these inter-SC trades of energy can also be effectuated either at the physical generator locations represented by physical nodes or pricing nodes, or at the aggregate pricing nodes or hubs, as we'll talk a bit later. So there's a duality there on where those inter-SC trades of energy can occur. Then there's also inter-SC trades of ancillary services, and again, this can facilitate bilateral arrangements of financial obligations associated with the provision of ancillary services between parties. And there are four types of ancillary service inter-SC trades. Those are, as noted there, regulation up and down, spinning reserve, and non-spinning reserve. These trades are financial-only trades. They're not occurring at defined locations in the market or in the footprint, but are financial-only and can only be effectuated in the real-time market. The reason we're not proposing to extend the inter-SC trades of ancillary services to EIM and EDAM areas is that ancillary services under the current market design are across the wider EIM or EDAM footprint are neither optimized or settled through the market. And then the final type of inter-SC trade functionality supported today is inter-SC trades of the IFM, or the Integrated Forward Market Load Uplift Obligation. And these types of inter-SC trades can facilitate transfer of the financial IFM load uplift obligation, known better as the bid cost recovery obligation between parties to the bilateral contract arrangement, to the extent that the bilateral contract provides for the financial responsibility associated with bid cost recovery or the IFM load uplift obligation. That can be effectuated through an inter-SC trade potentially. And similar to inter-SC trades of ancillary services, these are financial-only trades. They're not at defined locations and are a feature of the real-time market only. And so we're also not proposing at this stage to extend this type of inter-SC trade to EIM and EDAM areas for a couple of different reasons. Primarily that this is really a feature of a participation in the day-ahead market, so it wouldn't necessarily be applicable in the EIM, but also because the current structure of settlement of the IFM load uplift obligation in the EDAM is with the balancing area, not necessarily with the discrete loads within that balancing area. So there might not be much value to this type of inter-SC trade of the EIFM load uplift obligation within the EDAM. But as we've noted in the proposal, we're certainly taking comment on whether parties find value to these types of inter-SC trades beyond inter-SC trades of energy and what that value may be, and we can consider potentially down the line. If we can go to the next slide, please. So, as I noted, and now in the next couple of slides, we'll go just a little bit deeper into the actual proposal, but the proposal is to extend the inter-SC trades of energy to EIM and EDAM areas. Scheduling coordinators, both in the EIM and EDAM, can find value in this optional settlement functionality and use for it, potentially. In the EDAM in particular, where loads and resources are now participating in the market through actual submission of bids, economic bids, or self-schedules, they may find value based on the bilateral arrangements that are in place for inter-SC trades of energy, either at physical generators or at the aggregation points / hubs, as it's known. There may be opportunities based on how those bilateral contracts are scheduled that some of the market settlements could be effectively traded related to energy between scheduling coordinators, depending on the structure of the relationships between these scheduling coordinators and the nature of the bilateral arrangements. In the EIM as well, there may be some value to this. We recognize that a structure is similar in the EIM. There are participating and non-participating resources in the EIM, and parties may find value in effectuating inter-SC trades at participating resources because we have those modeled in the market, we have prices associated with those, and at discrete nodes. Inter-SC trades in the EIM areas at non-participating resources really would not be supported because those resources are not actively bidding into the market. So even in the EIM, parties may find some value at those participating resource locations to effectuate these inter-SC trades of energy, or may find value in the future. We wanted to keep the option open for both of these. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, we'll pause for questions here, just a couple of more slides, just to paint that full picture of the inter-SC trades of energy. But inter-SC trades of energy then, which we will propose be extended to EIM and EDAM areas, we're proposing to extend the same functionality effectively in the structure that exists today associated with these inter-SC trades within the ISO balancing area. And so there are two types of inter-SC trades of energy. There's physical trades, and those are trades at the specific modeled physical generator location at their associated pricing node where settlements occur. There's no defined limit to the number of trades at that particular physical location. And in the EIM, as I noted, eligible resources at those participating locations could effectuate those physical trades. And in the EDAM, because all the resources are now modeled and participating in the market through either economic bids or self-schedules, that's inherent within the EDAM as well, that those could occur at the physical resource locations. Then there's also inter-SC trades of energy associated with trades at aggregate pricing nodes, also known as trading hubs or load aggregation points. But these are inter-SC trades maybe that are not backed by a specific physical resource, depending on the structure of the agreement. And these have some limitations associated with how frequently these can be effectuated, but they're generally limited to one aggregate pricing node trade, inter-SC trade, per scheduling coordinator for a trading hour. So a little bit more limited than the physical trades that can occur really at the physical location without any limitations on the frequency within the hour. But nevertheless, these are the two features of the inter-SC trades of energy that would be extended or is proposed to be extended to the EIM and the EDAM. We can go to the next slide. I'll briefly cover some of the informational requirements, and again, this is part of the existing functionality, existing procedures for effectuating these inter-SC trades of energy, but there are associated submission timelines both in the day-ahead and the real-time market. In the day-ahead market, you can submit these 7 days prior to the trading day, and by 11 a.m. or hour ending 11, day ahead. And then in the real-time market, these can also be effectuated and beginning effectively at midnight prior to that trading day and up to 45 minutes prior to the trading hour. There are informational requirements, as I'll show on the next slide. These are submitted via an existing tool via Cyber that requires identification of certain information to be able to effectuate these trades and indicate to the market the existence of a trade. But they're fairly straightforward and simple, where parties have to identify the scheduling ID from scheduling coordinator ID from which the energy is traded, and then the counterparty scheduling coordinator has also to submit a inter-SC trade to identify themselves as well as the recipient of that trade. So both parties, both scheduling coordinators have to submit an inter-SC trade that I'll talk a bit later is validated to ensure that they match. But identifying who the scheduling coordinator is, the location of the energy trade, is it at the physical generator itself and identifying that physical location of that generator, or is it at a particular APN or aggregation point effectively? And then the market in which this trade is sold, is it day ahead, is it real-time market, and then some of the information as to the start and end day of the trade and the megawatt hours or the quantity of the trade of the energy to be traded between the two scheduling coordinators. And if we go to the next slide, and I'll pause for questions after this next slide, but I just wanted to illustrate that the inter-SC trades, as I mentioned, are submitted via existing functionality. We had the Cyber tool. There is a space or an area within the tool where you can submit inter-SC trades with drop-down boxes requesting all of the necessary information to effectuate that trade. And as I mentioned, both scheduling coordinators, parties to the trade, make their own independent submissions, and then as we'll talk in validations, the market tries to match those to ensure that they're valid, that they match and have the same information in addition to other validations. This is the tool that would have, to the extent that this proposal is approved, it would have certain modifications that would be necessary to ensure that now the functionality is able to accept scheduling coordinators within EIM and EDAM areas as well, along with other aspects as well. But I think that there's a section to the Cyber user guide to the extent parties are interested in how that functionality works. Section 4 of that user guide provides screenshots and process for how the tool is to be utilized. So let me pause here for some questions. We'll go, after the questions, we'll go to an example that Tyler is going to walk us through. But let's take some questions here and any clarifications that we can provide.
First in the queue, we have Don.
Hi, Don Trethewey from GDS Associates. So let's assume that Idaho, Nevada, and CAISO are all in the EDAM together. If I wanted to do an inter-SC trade from a generator located in Idaho for a load in CAISO, would that be one inter-SC trade, or would that be 3 inter-SC trades? One inter-SC trade within Idaho, one inter-SC trade within Nevada, and one inter-SC trade within CAISO.
There is only one inter-SC trade at a given location. The location can be anywhere. It could be a P node or a P node among the approved locations for the trade. So you only need the from SC, the to NC, the location, and the type of the trade. So it could be an SC that has supply in one BAA, trading with NSC that has demand in another BAA, it doesn't matter. The inter-SC trade is settled at the LMP at the location that is selected for the trade to take place. Does that answer your question, Don?
I think it does. I think it's that you're doing it'd be a single inter-SC trade, which makes a lot of sense. But then I think the follow-on to that is, I think you then need to have a common approach to congestion revenue and transfer revenue in order to fully mimic the true bilateral trade. Because currently congestion revenue and transfer revenue is left to the individual OATs. But if you wanted to truly replicate the bilateral trade, it's, you have two different SCs, one for the supplier and one for the generator. And to fully reflect the bilateral contract, you would use a single inter-SC trade, and then you would have a hedge, congestion hedge, that was given to the load serving entity from the generator to the load, and you've completely mimicked the bilateral settlement.
So Don, I can't speak on the nature of the bilateral contract that is between the parties, but for the trade that is settled through the ISO, the inter-SC trade, one of the uses of it is to actually divide the congestion cost between supply and demand at that trade location. So the supply SC assumes the congestion cost from the supply location to the trade location, and the demand SC assumes the responsibility for the congestion cost for the rest of the path from the trade location to the demand location. So even if it spans different BAAs, that they have different marginal energy costs, what we call transfer revenue, which is the difference between the marginal energy cost across BAAs, falls into that. So if you are going from BAA A to BAA B for the trade, and your trade location is in A, then the transfer revenue goes on the second leg, which is assumed by the demand SC. If the trade location is in BAA B, then the cost for the transfer, the difference of the MECs, is assumed by the supply SC. So it gives the opportunity for the two parties to essentially divide the congestion cost from supply to demand at the agreed location. And as you mentioned, there could be some other mechanism that, there might be a hedge for some congestion revenue from one location to another. If it's a congestion revenue right that the ISO manages, that could be one. If it's another mechanism, that could be another. But we're only commenting here on the mechanism of the trade. There could be other financial arrangements behind the trade that we're not aware.
Yeah, I think the example I was trying to work through is a pure physical inter-SC trade, that the congestion and transfer revenue is needed to have that full hedge and to fully replicate that bilateral transaction.
Right, so I cannot answer the question because I don't know what bilateral transaction you're referring to. I mean, there could be different ones, so I can only tell you how we settle the inter-SC trade and what it means to the parties without the additional impact of any other financial arrangements that they have behind the inter-SC trade.
Yeah, in other words, George, the inter-SC trade functionality may not necessarily support every kind of bilateral arrangement that parties have. They may need to still, depending on the structure of those bilateral arrangements, they may need to still do certain settlements behind the scenes bilaterally between them.
Right, it really divides the congestion cost between the parties, And how each party now recovers or hedges for that cost is a different mechanism. The inter-sea trade only divides the congestion cost between the parties. It doesn't provide a hedge. You need to seek a hedge separately from that. So that's one of the mechanisms, one of the uses of the inter-sea trade. Another use is to balance your portfolio. So you can have an SC that has supply and a SC that has demand. They're unbalanced as one SC at a time, but with an inter-SC trade, they can balance the portfolios, and now they can appear balanced. That could be significant in the efforts of an EWAA trying to, for example, allocate surcharges that the ISO assesses for failing the resource efficiency evaluation. It may be important to have an LSC show to the entity that their portfolio is balanced, meaning their demand is served by supply, and therefore on their own they meet their obligations, at least in energy. So it's a versatile tool that can be used for different purposes. I'm just mentioning two here. But it doesn't provide hedge for congestion costs.
Christina, I think we can go to the next one.
Next in the queue, we have Alva.
Alva Svoboda, PG&E. I think this is just clarification from the previous discussion and what Milos had said, but I wanted to confirm inter-SC trades cannot be done within CAISO at DLAPs or SLAPs. Is that correct? It's only at supplied node locations or aggregate supply node locations?
That's right. Yeah, and they're not done at the enterprise either, yeah.
All right, so there's consistent treatment then between
That's right.
any new, great. Thank you very much, Milos.
Yeah.
Next in the queue, we have JK.
Hi, JK Wang from PG&E. I may have a very basic question, and will appreciate a clarification from Milos or from George. Does inter-SC trade affect the counting of the transmission capacity or the RSE in EDAM or WEM?
Yeah, not at all. It's a financial tool that essentially affects your settlement. It doesn't have any impact in any market mechanism, including the resource efficiency evaluation or the optimal schedule of resources.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, JK.
Next in the queue, we have Tong.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. Tong Wu from WAPA. WAPA strongly supports ISO's effort to extend IST feature to EDAM footprint. And I just saw on the previous slide that there's only one inter-ISA trade per SC at the APN. I think the previous slide. Here. The second bullet, trades at aggregate pricing nodes. Limited to one APN inter-SC trade per scheduling coordinator for a trading hour. This will not meet WAPA's requirements. We need to be able to have multiple trades because we have multiple customers. We intend to use the IST to allocate CVP power to multiple customers. So although from WAPA side, there's only one SC, but on the customer side, there will be multiple SCs that we need to trade with. So I don't know whether that's what you intend to say, or we need to make this more flexible.
Thank you, Tong. Yeah, maybe if you can note that in your comments. I don't know if we have Wendell on I think he called in, maybe operator, just maybe good to hear from Wendell on the particulars of the cyber limitation that imposes this limit today, if he's on. But if not, we'll follow up offline, and note that in your comments, and we'll certainly take a look. Yeah. Okay. I don't think we have Wendell. We'll put that in your comments, Don. We'll take a look as well at you know, what the level of flexibility may be associated with the limitation and why it's there in the first place. It's an existing limitation today that we can take a look at.
Next in the queue, we have Stuart.
Stuart, your line is unmuted. You can go ahead.
Stuart, we can't hear you.
Stuart, we're not getting
Maybe.
any audio from your line. If you can send your question via the chat, we can move to the next person in our verbal queue, being Nadia Ware. Nadia, your line is unmuted. You can go ahead. All right, Nadia, we're not getting any audio from your line either. If you can try a different mic or send your question through the chat, we'll be able to read your question there.
There are no other questions in the queue. Stuart and Nadia, if you have questions still, feel free to. I just got a question from Stuart in the chat saying, quote, LADWP supports Tong's request for multiple trades at an APN for a trading hour, end quote.
Sounds good. Thank you, Christina. Yeah, and Stuart, if you can hear us, by all means, please feel free to include that in your comments as well. We'll look into you know, whether these are systems limitations and the rationale for it. Thank you.
And we just got another hand raised by Dan.
Hey, this is Dan Williams from the Energy Authority. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, so in addition to supporting Tong and Stuart's request there, I may have missed it, but Milos, did you discuss sort of how the model trading hubs would be established within the EDAM areas, and whether there may be sort of sub-laps within larger EDAM areas versus single laps?
Yeah, Dan, let me start, and then George and other folks, that maybe you can come in if you've got some of that history, George. But this will be part of the modeling discussions with the EIM and the EDAM entities, what the appropriate location for those APNs and you know, the composition of it. It's a modeling discussion with those parties as part of their of enabling this functionality within their balancing areas. I don't know, George, if you have anything else to add to that structure.
I think there is a certain level of flexibility defining the trading hubs that, you know, basically the request should come from the participants, from the entity. It will be useful to have those trading hubs being used in actual trades. Then, you know, they make a good selection for having that trading hub as a inter-SC trade location. That is not absolutely necessary. As long as it's something that makes sense for having this available for inter-SC trade locations, it's something that we can define it, you know, within modest number of those for an entity. It could represent, for example, as it says already in that bullet, a load aggregation point for a BAA, which is the load center, if you will, and the LMP for that represents the demand, the cost for serving the demand at the BAA. Or it could be a generation aggregation point that would represent the price of supply for that BAA. So anything that makes sense to be used as a location for inter-SC trade settlement, we can set it up. You know, have a request from you to us, and we'll evaluate it and define it.
Thanks, George. So is that something that could be sort of, let's say, worked on during implementation testing, that, you know, whether it's an EDAM entity or a third-party scheduling coordinator, to kind of bring that to the table as like, hey, we expect this to be kind of a you know, useful trading hub, or maybe based on experience in the bilateral market, we expect that there may be some congestion-based separation within a EDAM area that could define sort of a smaller load aggregation point than maybe what's been there within EIM, kind of given the congestion management in EIM versus EDAM, that we could kind of talk and work through some of those things in the pre-go live testing environment to get some of this nailed down before the market goes live.
Yeah, I think it would be best to settle these elements, these setup elements, because really this is a setup during EDAM onboarding discussions, so that then they will be available for market simulation and parallel operation before we go live. We catch it from the beginning.
Okay, thank you. Oh, and one other thing is just, I heard Don ask the question, but I didn't hear the first part of the answer. Is it going to be possible to sort of do this between the CAISO and non-CAISO EDAM areas, as well as sort of within each of the two?
Yeah, as long as the inter-SC trade location is a P node or an AP node anywhere in the market footprint. Yeah, there is no restriction to be in a same BAA with a supply or the same BAA with a demand. It could be anywhere. It's really the inter-SC
Comes down to
trade
the
is
congestion exposure, maybe, and the difference in like
yeah,
the congestion model that may occur that you'd have to account for between the
right.
CAISO.
Yeah, it splits the congestion, so it's a, let's say it's a neutral ground for congestion cost between the supply and demand, what they agree to cover each party. I mean, if it's the generator location, the congestion cost is assumed by the demand. If it's a demand location, the congestion cost is assumed by the supply, saying, I deliver energy at your location, you don't have to worry about congestion cost. If it's an intermediate point, then you split it at that location. Could be a trading hub, and if it is supplies in one BAA, demands in another BAA, the location could be, you know, a trade, a transfer system resource, so you split it at the boundary. So there are basically different different options where you can use this for.
Yeah, so sort of the goal is to set up a neutral platform framework, and then as entities sort of learn the way that the congestion settlements are impacting them, sort of depending on where they sit and live within the market, then they can kind of use that platform to do the deal appropriately and reflect maybe the way that the congestion is getting treated in different areas.
That's right.
Okay. Thanks, George. Really appreciate the extra info there.
And Christina, maybe we can take Nadia's question that I think she put in her chat first before moving on to the next question.
Yes, so Nadia Ware said in the chat, she said, quote, I have a clarifying question. So this method is a way for the market to track trades between market participants and aid settlements, end quote.
say that one more time?
So it's,
Okay.
she asked, so this method is a way for the market to track trades between market participants and AIDS settlements.
No, this is not any kind of a tracking mechanism of trade. This is an optional tool depending on the structure of the bilateral arrangements and how market settlements and the value and revenues for energy, for example, received from the bidding of that generation. To the extent that the bilateral arrangements provide for particular dispositions of those, the market can facilitate settlement through that inter-SC trade with the appropriate scheduling coordinates. It's an optional tool, doesn't have to be effectuated. It's a service effectively that allows for settlement through the market with the appropriate scheduling coordinator based on the bilateral agreement that parties may have. Doesn't have to be used. It's just purely an optional feature.
Next in the queue, we have a hand raised by Doug.
Hi, Doug Bochignone for BAMX. My understanding is that when you're doing the SC trades at an aggregated pricing node, it's the limitation is per counterparty. So it's not just
That's right.
transaction.
That's right.
Trading.
That's right. I was just desperately searching through my notes in the business practice. That's right. It's not.
Yeah.
And thanks for clarifying that it's one APN inter-SC trade per counterparty at a particular location per hour. So to the extent that you have multiple counterparties.
Yeah, between any two counterparties, you have to net all your transactions at that APN for that interval, but you're not limited. You could
That's
do
right.
it at the same interval, same location. You could have another counterparty.
That's right. That's right. And I think that would get to both Tong's and Stuart's questions. And thanks for clarifying. And I did end up finding it here. Thanks for the clarification that it's limited to an APN per counterparty. So, to the extent that you've got multiple off-takers on the contract, I think as you mentioned, Tong, you can execute multiple trades. Just you'll be executing it with different parties at that same location.
So there are still raised hands. Is it from before, or do I have more questions?
Yeah, Christina, it looks like there are some other raised hands. Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
There's one more question in the chat, actually, from Simon Steiner asking, is it correct that physical trades cannot be entered for battery and hybrid resources? If yes, what is the reason, and are there any plans to allow this in the future?
Ask Wendell.
That's a good question. Let us follow up. I'm not aware of a limitation, and I will. Let us text Wendell. Wendell is online, but he's not able to get into the panelist.
Wendell did comment about the trade to correct that, but he also does say that we plan to have that available by the time EDAM is rolled out.
Right, so it's a current limitation, we will take it up.
Yeah.
Before EDAM also?
Yeah, let us put that in your comments. We can clarify it. I think there's work underway to enable inter-SC trades at those battery and hybrid resource locations that may be led by a different project. But let us look into that and clarify, and maybe note it in your comments, and we'll respond to the next iteration of the paper. And I'll reach out to you as well separately once we run this to ground.
And there are no further questions in the queue.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide then, and this is going to be just a simplistic example just to illustrate for those parties that are not familiar with inter-SC trades and how they work and what they ultimately result in. I think it's also going to illustrate a use case. For example, I think the most common use case that we see today. But I'll turn it over to Tyler here from our settlements group to walk you through it. And Christina, I think you can go to the next slide.
Yep. Thank you, Milos. So we have, jumping into the example, we have the generator A and having a bilateral contract with load B. And their contract stipulates that they can buy 20 megawatts per hour per day and the price of $40 per megawatt for that day. So they're doing the supply to load B from Gen A. The load B paid Gen A $19,200 for the supply, serving the load B demand under that bilateral. And then when we get into the market payments and charges, the generator A revenues, it's paid $20,750 in the market, and load B is charged $20,305 in the market, so as part of the market results for settlement. And generator A and load B have decided to use that inter-SC trade to transfer or swap money from the bilateral and the market settlement. We can go to the next slide. So the top one is before the inter-SC trade. You see that load B is paid $19,200 as part of the bilateral contract, but then in the CAISO market, with the scheduling, it pays $20,305, so the total net amount is $39,505. Whereas generator A is paid $19,200 from the bilateral. The CAISO market additionally pays at $20,750 as part of the settlement charge codes. So the total net amount on this is $39,950. When you incorporate the inter-SC trade, you see that there's a reversal where you have the $20,750 that gets paid back to the load, and then $20,750 that the generator is charged, and that evens out and brings the net amount back to where you have the bilateral contract, with a slight difference with the $20,750 versus the $23,005 accounted for on the load. Do we have questions on this?
There's currently no hands raised or questions in the chat.
Okay, I do want to make one quick update. We'll have to update the settlement charge codes for this. It's actually two charge codes for energy. It's 6301 and 6371, so we'll make that update.
Yeah, and I'll just note before we move off of this element that I think this illustrates an inter-SC trade between, again, a generator and a load, depending on their bilateral arrangement and the disposition under that contract of market revenues. And I think that's probably one of the more common use cases we've seen today. But again, this doesn't have to be effectuated through the market. Inter-SC trade provide for the ability so that we're settling those market revenues with the appropriate party under the terms of the agreement, but also parties don't have to do this through the inter-SC trade. They can just do that offline. Effectively, everything goes to the appropriate scheduling coordinator that bid in the generator, and then offline, bilaterally, they can trade those revenues between the parties. I think this goes to one of the questions here that somebody asked, do these have to be used, or it's completely an optional feature. Okay, if we can go to the next slide then. Okay, I'll just briefly talk for a couple of slides on just validations on inter-SC trades of energy, and this is really intended to illustrate the process that inter-SC trades are taken through to ensure that they are accurate and true inter-SC trades between matching counterparties to the trade. So if we can go to the next slide. Physical inter-SC trades go through a number of validations in the market. And so there's a general validation, and I've noted there the tariff sections that apply to the extent anybody's interested to see more the different components of these. But there's a general validation up front that when those inter-SC trades are submitted via Cyber, the tool that we shared earlier, those couple of screenshots, that when both parties bring in and submit those inter-SC trades, that they're submitting the same consistent information, that both are identifying the appropriate counterparty subject to the inter-SC trade, that they're both matching the location of the inter-SC trade, the market, and then the megawatt. To the extent that you know, some of those validations are failed, they haven't submitted necessarily the matching information, though there are some notifications that go out to the parties to try to point out that there are some inconsistencies and giving them opportunity to fix those. There's then also what we call a submittal screening that checks that the submitted physical trades also don't exceed the maximum capable output of that particular generating unit that's subject to that physical trade. There are also pre-market validations that ultimately compare the total megawatt hour quantity of the submitted trades at that specific physical location of the generator for that generating unit. It doesn't exceed the bid amount effectively of for that unit in the market. And then there are also after the fact post-market or post-market validations that check that the generating unit schedule can support the magnitude and the amount of the physical trades. If it cannot, depending on what the ultimate schedule is, the market may adjust those physical trades volumes to the amount of the schedule for that particular resource. So if the trade was for 80 megawatts, but the resource ultimately was scheduled for 50 in the market, after going through the optimization, the physical trade is adjusted down to 250. So there's a number of validations that take place to ensure that these are accurate validations between willing parties with the matching information, and that they ultimately are supported by the physical unit's performance and schedule and bids in the market. We can go to the next slide, please. And there's something similar, but I think a bit less rigorous on inter-SC trades for energy at aggregate pricing nodes. They're not necessarily subject to those same validation steps for physical units that are bidding at that physical location or schedule at that physical location, but there are validations, the general validations that at those aggregate pricing nodes for those inter-SC trades to ensure that the parties are submitting the same level of information for the trades to ensure that both parties are matched in order to ensure it's a valid inter-SC trade that the parties are asking for the market to settle. Okay. Maybe let me pause here just to see if there are any questions on the validations. Again, those are, the references are to the tariff sections. I'll talk a bit later about some additional resources. There's a slide that has a number of helpful links to the extent parties wanted to look into the nuances of how inter-SC trades work and what tools are used. Just checking if there are any other questions on validations or even more broadly on inter-SC trades.
We have a hand raised by Dan.
Milos, Dan Williams from the Energy Authority again. I missed the first few minutes of the meeting when you were setting this up, but resource efficiency evaluation, is there any link here to that? And I'm thinking about it in the context more of an EDAM area that may or may not, still kind of working on the policy there, but may have some sub-allocation of resource efficiency requirements within their BA, or I guess even in the future, if the CAISO moves to some sub-allocation of resource efficiency requirements, would any of this be useful in that context, or not?
Yeah, I'll start, and then George, I'll turn it over to you. But as a starting point, inter-SC trades do not affect the counting of the resource efficiency evaluation. They're not a consideration. It's purely a settlement feature, so they don't impact, if you have multiple inter-SC trades, those don't affect the counting of whether somebody has met the resource efficiency evaluation. But there may be potentially, depending on how parties use these, there may be some potential value in ultimately determining downstream within the balancing area, to the extent that there are, contributions to the performance of the RSC. And maybe I'll turn it over to you, George, to give some insights of potentially how this could be used. Again, this is not necessarily the intent of why we propose this policy to have this secondary value, but it may provide some potential value depending on how parties structure that compliance with the RSC within their balancing area.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with it. And George, maybe while you're talking to that as well, just at one point in the EDAM development, we were talking about like a bid range trading platform for RSC, and I didn't know if you've forgotten from all the work that's happened since then, where that landed, and if that has any relation to this as well.
Okay. As we said earlier, the inter-SC trade is a purely financial tool. It affects settlements, doesn't affect the market functions, including the resource efficiency evaluation. Let me mention again an example that I said earlier when I was responding to Dan Trethewey, that it could be used as a mechanism to balance an SC portfolio if that is relevant for the purpose of allocating RSC failure surcharges to scheduling coordinators under a BAA. This is something we haven't looked into our initiative for the ISO Balancing Authority area, although it could be a possibility, and other EDAM entities developing their own procedures for the allocation of that RSC failure cost to their participants may look into that. The inter-SC trade could be used as a tool to balance your portfolio and essentially drop out from that allocation of those surcharges, saying that, that my demand is served by supply. Here's the AST that shows that my portfolio is balanced, at least for energy. Of course, there is imbalance reserve requirement, but it's a tool that could be used in that in these discussions, and none that I can tell you right now. It's just a possibility. We put it out as a flexible tool that could be used in multiple ways. This could be one way. You mentioned the energy trading for bid trading across BAAs for RSC. This we achieve now through what we call RSC eligible transfers. So instead of having the extremely complicated process to support at the resource level, where a resource would say, okay, I'm going to trade my bid capacity or this much of my bid capacity to another BAA for meeting its RSC obligations, we're handling it at the resource portfolio base at the BAA level, allowing entities to define RSC eligible transfers, which essentially transfer the requirement, the RSC requirement from the BAA that receives the transfer to the BAA that supplies the transfer, and then the resource efficiency evaluation simply uses the capacity bids from all resources at BAA to meet the requirements as adjusted by these RSC eligible transfers. So this was a more efficient and more generic way to achieve that.
Yeah, and I apologize for having maybe a little bit of a slow memory on an afternoon here, but when did that all sort of transpire or get discussed? And the reason that I ask is just because we're within the CAISO's, I think it's the BA rules initiative, or maybe within the day-ahead sufficiency initiative, there's work there to go down to look at potentially sub-allocation of the overall CAISO BA resource efficiency requirement, maybe down to a load serving entity level. Potentially within non-CAISO EDAM BAs, there may be a need to look at the LSE level requirements within the EDAM BA. But in any event, the paradigm that you just discussed to me, struggles at the point where a BA is not a financially transacting entity. And so that kind of, I struggle with that model from the standpoint that there are parties within the BAs that financially transact, but not the BAs themselves.
Thanks, Dan. And look, I think we're veering a little.
And I'm taking us kind of far afield. I apologize for that, but it all kind of
feel
came
free
out
to reach out. Yeah,
it came out of what can an NRSC trade be used for, and then when you start thinking through what can an NRSC trade be used for, it becomes, well, what can it, and what other issues are we still trying to solve? But fully support the work that's being done on this, and I think WAPA has really defined the need statement very well within its kind of resource portfolio for why this needs to exist and how it can be used. But there's probably still a little more work to think through of, does it catch all the other, maybe some other things that need to be done in other areas and use cases. But thanks again.
Thank you, Dan.
Next in the queue, we have Don.
Don Trethewey, GDS Associates. I just have a clarifying question, but first, we fully support having NRSC trades as a feature of the extended day ahead market. The question is, if I enter into a physical NRSC trade and the generators, dispatch lower than the physical trade, it's not that you reduce the amount of the trade to the actual output of the generator. You simply convert the portion that's not supported by the generator to a converted physical trade, which is then settled at the AP node. I assume that that's the same way you would implement this within the EDAM footprint?
Right, yeah.
Thanks.
And there are no further questions in the queue.
Okay, thank you, Christina. Let's go to the next slide. I'll talk a bit about next steps, and then we'll pause for another round of questions if somebody thinks of anything else. But if we can go to the next slide, just in terms of some of the next steps, the stakeholder comments on the straw proposal will be due by the end of this month, August 30th. And then, informed by those comments, by this discussion, we would target to publish the draft final proposal sometime in September, probably towards the later part, depending on the volume of comments and clarifications or requests that we see. We have published the comment template already on the initiative webpage, so it's available out there if you wanted to submit those comments. But we would then target, if we're able to publish that in September, that draft final proposal, then we would target the ISO Board of Governors and Western Energy Markets governing body meeting in early November for a decision on this item, and then we would go through the same process that we usually go through. To the extent that that's approved, we would publish draft tariff language, hold a stakeholder or two meetings on that, and then prepare for a filing effort. As I noted at the beginning, from an implementation perspective, we don't expect this to be a significant lift. And so because we can leverage a lot of the existing functionality with certain adjustments to ensure that this functionality is extended to scheduling coordinators that are operating and representing loads resources within the EDAM or the EIM areas. And so we would look to target implementation, then align with the EDAM launch in May of 2026. And there will be opportunities to test this functionality through the market simulation period in September that's associated with EDAM. And there will also be trainings associated with this. They'll be part of the broader training as we approach the implementation of EDAM. And I think we're working on publishing some other trainings, just on overall NRSC trades, how they work for parties that may be interested in this in EIM and EDAM areas. We're working on publishing those here in the coming weeks. Some existing trainings that have already been part of broader market trainings that we have out there. So we can go to the next slide. I'll highlight as well some of the reference materials that you may find helpful to the extent that you wanted to look into how are these effectuated, what tools are used, what's the information required. But there's these are some of the links to the tariff, to the business practices, and as I noted at the beginning, we'll be looking to extend the same functionality and processes associated with this, the existing features, to EDAM and EIM areas. So let me pause here again and just see if there are any other questions before turning it over to Christina for some closing remarks.
I'm not seeing any further questions in the queue.
Okay. Well, let me then just extend our appreciation and thanks to everybody for attending the call today. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or clarifications before comments are due, to the extent that something comes up. We're certainly happy to engage, and then we'll look forward to your comments. But thank you again, everybody, and Christina, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Milos. Now just to go over some announcements. For insights into the ISO grid and market operations, be on the lookout for our Energy Matters blog, or you can always subscribe. Here you can see the latest posts regarding the 20-year transmission outlook, another one on changes to the ISO's interconnection process, and another on RC West. Next, we'd like to remind you of the policy initiatives timeline. The ISO has launched this timeline to give stakeholders really a better overview of ongoing policy initiatives, and it really offers details such as the initiative status, timelines, the current phase of the stakeholder engagement process, and updates are made weekly and can be found on the policy initiatives landing page. For more info, feel free to always email us at isostakeholderaffairs@kaiso.com. We'd also like to remind you that registration is open for the 2024 Stakeholder Symposium. You can visit the event website here for additional information. And lastly, we'd like to ask you to please save the date for the Resource Interconnection Standards Fair on September 17th. This will provide stakeholders with an opportunity to learn more about the ISO's interconnection process, as well as recent changes affecting Cluster 15. If you plan to attend in person, please register by September 13th. And stakeholders are encouraged to submit questions in advance, which will be addressed during the meeting. And this can be done by emailing isostakeholderaffairs@kaiso.com. And with that, we'd like to thank you for joining today's discussion. As a reminder, this meeting was recorded for information and convenience purposes only, and the video file will be posted on the initiative webpage. Thank you so much, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you all in the audience for joining us today. With that, our call is concluded, and you may now disconnect.